It was a quiet night, the kind where the world outside seemed to hold its breath, when Emily Carter heard the knock. 3 soft, careful taps at her door, almost polite in their insistence, startled her enough to make her heart skip a beat. She had been alone in her small townhouse in Oregon, the rain drumming lightly against the windows, the house filled with the faint scent of her tea that she hadn't yet touched. It was late, later than she usually stayed up, but she had been lost in thoughts of the day, the subtle ache of loneliness pressing against her chest. Opening the door slowly, unsure what she would find, she was met with the familiar, but now grown, face of Lucas Bennett, her neighbor's son, who had once been a boy running around the lawns with reckless energy, and now stood there with a quiet, hesitant maturity. His hair was damp, clinging slightly to his forehead from the rain, and his jacket, thin against the chill, did little to hide the tension in his shoulders. His eyes met hers with a mixture of worry and something unspoken, a depth that made Emily's chest tighten for reasons she couldn't yet name. "I'm sorry to bother you this late," he said, his voice low and careful, tinged with nervousness. "My mom isn't answering her phone, and I saw your light on." Emily, despite her surprise, stepped aside without thinking, inviting him in, and in that small gesture, a shift happened in the quiet rhythm of her night. Inside, the warmth of her home wrapped around them, a stark contrast to the rain-soaked chill outside, and for a moment, the awkward tension seemed to soften, replaced by a fragile connection built on years of proximity, familiarity, and the unspoken bond of shared memories. Lucas shifted slightly, unsure where to stand, his hands buried in his pockets, and Emily realized he had changed. He wasn't the reckless, boyish neighbor she had once known, he was someone navigating the complexities of adulthood, carrying the quiet weight of disappointment and hope all at once. She noticed the subtle lines of stress around his eyes, the way his voice carried a mixture of relief and embarrassment when he realized his worry had caused him to come to her. "She's staying with my aunt," Emily said after checking her phone, her words calm, practical, but carrying a soothing undertone. "Bad reception out there." "She's fine." Relief washed over Lucas's face, but it quickly turned into a kind of awkward smile that made Emily's chest feel both light and heavy at the same time. They moved toward the kitchen, the sound of rain forming a gentle backdrop to the quiet house, and Emily poured them both a cup of tea, the simple act of sharing warmth bridging the distance that had formed over the years. Conversation started slowly, hesitantly, circling around safe topics like his work in Seattle, her recent divorce, and the small, mundane shifts in life that somehow felt monumental when shared in the stillness of the night. Each word, each pause, carried a weight of unspoken longing and reflection. Emily realized she was seeing Lucas not as the neighbor she had casually waved to over the fence or watched grow up from her window, but as a man who had his own struggles, hopes, and quiet fears, someone whose presence now stirred emotions she had thought long buried. Lucas, for his part, was measuring her reactions, noticing the subtle changes in her too, the way her hands moved, the faint lines around her eyes, the softness in her voice when she spoke without realizing it. Neither of them mentioned the years that had passed, but the memories lingered in every glance, every small gesture. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, yet inside, a new rhythm formed between them, one of cautious attention, of silent curiosity, and of an unspoken understanding that something important had begun, something neither expected but both felt pressing against the edges of their hearts. Emily's mind raced with a mixture of excitement, confusion, and the familiar ache of loneliness being challenged by something dangerous yet thrilling, an awakening she wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore. Lucas's presence, unexpected and gentle, had shifted the quiet night into something alive, something that promised connection, warmth, and perhaps a chance to reclaim what both had silently missed over the years. As the clock ticked quietly in the background, Emily and Lucas sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the cups of tea between them warming their hands, yet unable to fully contain the warmth building between their eyes, their smiles, and the soft, hesitant laughter that began to fill the room. It was a night that neither of them had planned, a night that began with a simple knock but promised a turn in their lives neither had anticipated. Outside, the rain continued to fall, oblivious to the small, quiet storm of emotions unfolding inside the house, a storm that whispered of longing, of rediscovery, and of the fragile beginnings of something delicate, beautiful, and entirely unexpected. By the time the night stretched on and the first hints of fatigue crept into their voices, Emily realized that she hadn't been this unsettled, this alive, in a long time, and Lucas, glancing around her home as if absorbing the comfort and security of it, seemed to carry the same mix of relief and longing. And in that moment, when words felt unnecessary and silence spoke louder than conversation, the knock that had started the night felt less like an interruption and more like a beginning, a spark that promised change, connection, and a night that neither of them would forget anytime soon. Once inside, the warmth of Emily's kitchen felt like a shelter from the storm outside, and Lucas shifted slightly, his wet jacket leaving faint traces of rain on the floor as he moved toward the table, a little awkward, a little unsure of how much of himself to show after years of growing up just across the driveway. Emily poured him a cup of tea, the steam rising between them like a soft barrier, and Lucas accepted it with a quiet, grateful smile, his fingers brushing the cup as if holding it could somehow anchor him to the calm of this moment. They sat across from each other, the table small, their knees almost touching, and at first, the conversation was hesitant, circling around safe topics like the weather, the long drive back from Seattle, and the mundane details of his job, yet beneath the surface, there was a pulse of familiarity that neither could ignore, a rhythm they had always shared but had never explored. Emily noticed the way his gaze lingered a little longer than necessary when he looked at her hands, the careful way he spoke, the soft pauses as if measuring the right words, and she felt a stirring of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, the awareness of attraction, of longing that wasn't hurried but quietly insistent. Lucas, for his part, saw the changes in Emily too, the small lines around her eyes that told of sleepless nights, the gentle curve of her smile that now carried wisdom and a subtle sadness, the way her voice could shift from strength to vulnerability in a heartbeat, and it made him realize that the neighbor he had once seen as just a familiar face was now a woman who held a depth he wanted to explore, someone whose presence made the room feel lighter, warmer, yet complicated. The rain tapped against the windows, steady and relentless, echoing the quiet tension between them, and as minutes passed, they began to talk about more personal things, though carefully, like his struggle with leaving Seattle, the emptiness he felt despite success, the dreams he had postponed, and her own journey through heartbreak and change, the loneliness that had quietly settled in her life after the divorce. Every word carried weight, every pause carried meaning, and soon, the conversation became less about information and more about connection, the kind that comes when two people realize they are both walking through a similar kind of quiet longing, each seeing in the other a mirror of their own hidden feelings. Emily found herself laughing softly at Lucas's dry humor, noticing the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, and Lucas felt a warmth he hadn't expected, a reminder of comfort, of safety, and of something fragile yet thrilling. There were moments of silence too, heavy but not uncomfortable, filled instead with the sound of rain, the occasional clink of the teacups, and the subtle energy between them that was growing with each shared glance, each unspoken thought. Emily realized that Lucas had grown into someone she respected, admired, and couldn't ignore, a man who was familiar yet new, who carried both youthful impulsiveness and mature reflection, and she felt a sudden, sharp awareness of her own emotions, of how much she had missed feeling seen, understood, and quietly cared for. Lucas noticed the little things about Emily, the way she listened, the way her eyes softened when she spoke, the small gestures that revealed kindness and patience, and it made him ache with the knowledge that he had never truly noticed her this way before, that the neighbor he had always known was now someone entirely different, someone he couldn't step away from without feeling the pull of regret. They lingered in these moments, their words slowing as their emotions grew stronger, subtle glances stretching longer, a brush of hands almost happening over the table but never quite, the tension between familiarity and possibility becoming almost unbearable. Lucas spoke about his time in the city, the loneliness, the noise, the ambition, and Emily shared fragments of her own days, the quiet evenings, the small victories, the subtle sadness that lingered after her marriage ended, each story weaving them closer, creating a sense of intimacy that neither had anticipated when he knocked at her door. There were laughs, too, moments of lightness where they reminisced about past neighborhood memories, small adventures from childhood, the careless freedom of youth, and yet beneath the humor lay the unspoken acknowledgement that both had changed, both had grown, and that what was happening now was delicate, new, and entirely unscripted. Time moved differently in that kitchen, minutes stretching into hours as the night deepened, the rain outside forming a constant, soothing rhythm, and Emily found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn to Lucas's presence, captivated by the way he spoke, the honesty in his voice, and the way his eyes seemed to search for her own, seeking answers to questions neither had yet voiced. Lucas felt the same pull, the quiet, insistent need to reach for her, to understand her, to bridge the distance that had existed for so long, and yet the awareness of caution, of boundaries, of timing, made him hesitant, even as his heart hammered in a way it hadn't in years. Emily realized that the emotions she was feeling were confusing but undeniable, longing mixed with curiosity, comfort mixed with desire, admiration mixed with the thrill of possibility, and Lucas sensed the same, an emotional cocktail that was intoxicating and frightening all at once. They talked until words became unnecessary, the silence now a companion rather than an absence, filled with the warmth of shared presence, the electricity of unspoken attraction, and the realization that a simple knock on the door had led them here, to this quiet night where time seemed to pause, leaving only them and the rain, the tea, and the small but undeniable shift in their connection. By the time Lucas finally glanced at the clock, both were startled at how quickly the hours had passed, how the world outside had faded into insignificance, and how the night had transformed from a chance encounter into a moment that neither of them could easily forget, a moment that carried the weight of possibility, of change, and of a bond that had been quietly forming for years but only now revealed itself in full. Emily felt a flutter of something dangerous yet thrilling, a mixture of anticipation and fear, and Lucas felt the same, knowing that stepping away from this night would leave a lingering ache, a question that neither could answer easily, and yet both were drawn forward by it, by the silent promise that this unexpected connection could be the start of something neither had dared to imagine, something that might redefine the quiet rhythm of their lives. And as the rain continued its gentle, persistent tapping against the windows, the night wrapped around them, cocooning them in a world of subtle glances, quiet laughter, and hearts that had been nudged awake by the simplest of gestures, a knock on the door that had shifted everything, leaving them both aware that something new, delicate, and potentially beautiful had begun, a story of longing, rediscovery, and emotional connection that would linger far beyond the early hours of the morning, a night that neither Emily nor Lucas would ever forget. The air between Emily and Lucas shifted in a way neither had expected, subtle but electric, as they lingered at the table, sipping the last of their tea while the rain continued its soft, relentless rhythm against the windows, a quiet soundtrack to the unfolding tension and connection that neither could ignore. Lucas set his cup down carefully, his fingers brushing the rim as if grounding himself, and finally spoke in a quieter, more honest tone, revealing the edges of vulnerability he rarely showed, telling Emily that he hadn't known how hard she'd been through life recently, that he'd assumed the bright, kind neighbor he remembered had somehow escaped struggle, and Emily felt a flicker of emotion she couldn't name, a mix of gratitude, longing, and a strange ache that made her heart pulse faster than the rain outside. She didn't look at him immediately, choosing instead to focus on the steam rising from her empty cup, knowing that words could never fully capture the weight of her experiences, the moments of loneliness, heartbreak, and hope that had shaped her, and yet Lucas's gaze never wavered, steady and patient, filled with a care that made her chest tighten, a reminder that someone truly saw her, all of her, in a way she hadn't felt in years. Their conversation deepened, moving beyond surface-level stories into quiet confessions, the kind of shared truths that feel dangerous because they touch places people usually keep hidden. Lucas spoke about the emptiness he'd felt after leaving Seattle, the way ambition and success had not filled the spaces he thought they would, and Emily shared the weight of her divorce, the nights of quiet reflection, the moments when she questioned whether she would ever feel understood again. As the night grew deeper, so did their connection, built not on words alone but on the way they listened, the way they leaned slightly forward, the subtle energy that passed when their eyes met, a tension that was not physical but emotional, thrilling because it was unexpected and raw, a delicate acknowledgement that something had shifted between them, something neither could unsee or deny. Emily noticed the small gestures Lucas made, the careful way he set his mug down, the occasional laugh that broke through his hesitation, the way he tilted his head when he listened, and it struck her how much she had missed this kind of presence in her life, a mix of familiarity, curiosity, and quiet admiration that made her feel alive again. Lucas, observing her, felt a rush of emotions too, He realized that the Emily before him was not just the neighbor from his past but a woman of depth, warmth, and subtle strength, someone who drew him in without even trying, whose quiet laughter and thoughtful words stirred feelings he had buried under years of routine and distance. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty, it was a shared understanding, a space where words were unnecessary because the emotion between them was tangible, a quiet current that connected them more deeply than conversation ever could. Emily found herself thinking about the years they had been neighbors, how close they had been physically yet distant emotionally, and how now, in one night, the distance seemed to evaporate, replaced with a fragile intimacy that both thrilled and scared her. Lucas reached for his cup again but hesitated, a subtle moment of pause that spoke louder than any words, his eyes catching hers with a look of unspoken curiosity, wonder, and perhaps longing, and Emily felt her own heart respond, a flutter that made her wonder if he felt the same undeniable pull she did. They began to speak again, carefully, about hopes, dreams, fears, and regrets, each confession like a key turning in the lock of understanding, unlocking doors neither had expected to open, doors that revealed not only who they were but what they secretly desired, the kind of desires that are safe to explore only in moments of quiet trust. The night continued its slow march, the rain outside never letting up, yet inside, time seemed suspended, each second stretched by their attention to one another, the subtle smiles, the small gestures of care, the gentle shifts in posture as if they were negotiating an invisible closeness, a proximity that neither had dared before. Emily realized that what she felt for Lucas was more than nostalgia for a familiar face, it was a genuine admiration, a recognition of someone she could connect with on multiple levels, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually, someone whose presence brought warmth to the cold, quiet nights she had grown used to, someone who made her feel both safe and alive simultaneously. Lucas, in turn, felt a mixture of awe and nervous excitement, recognizing that Emily's kindness, her quiet strength, and the depth of her emotions were drawing him in completely, challenging his sense of caution, and stirring feelings that had been dormant, feelings that whispered of a connection that could grow into something lasting if nurtured carefully. At one point, Emily glanced at the clock and realized how quickly the hours had passed, the night moving faster than either of them noticed, yet the emotional weight of the moments made it feel as if time had slowed, elongating every glance, every touch of a hand to a mug, every soft laugh and pause filled with meaning, and she knew that neither of them would ever see this night as ordinary. Lucas felt it too, a recognition that what had started as a simple knock had transformed into an entire emotional journey, a shared vulnerability and awareness that lingered between them like a delicate thread neither wanted to break. They talked about small things too, the neighborhood, old friends, memories from childhood, the way life had changed for them, but each topic carried subtext, a layering of emotions that built a quiet intimacy, a shared understanding that life could be unpredictable, but connections like this were rare and precious. Emily noticed how naturally Lucas's presence fit into her space, how easily their conversation flowed when fear and hesitation melted into shared honesty, how the night seemed to be bending around them, holding them in a bubble where only the two of them existed, and she felt an emotional clarity she hadn't experienced in years, the realization that human connection could still surprise, heal, and ignite feelings she thought had faded. Lucas, catching her glance, smiled softly, and in that moment, neither spoke, but their eyes held all the unspoken words, the excitement, the hesitation, the curiosity, and the quiet longing that made the air between them charged, palpable, and unforgettable. The rain outside seemed to match the rhythm of their emotions, steady, persistent, and relentless, a mirror to the subtle intensity growing inside the kitchen as they navigated their new awareness of one another, each word, each look, each pause layering upon the last, forming a night neither could forget. As Emily cleared the last of the teacups, Lucas offered to help, and their hands brushed briefly, a spark, small but undeniable, sending warmth up their arms, a subtle acknowledgement that the connection they were feeling was real, mutual, and undeniable. Neither spoke about it, not yet, but the energy lingered, a quiet hum of emotion that made every movement, every glance, every breath feel significant. The night was not about urgency or action, it was about awareness, about seeing, being seen, and feeling something deeper than words could capture, and as they finally sat back, a comfortable silence enveloping them, both realized that this night had become a turning point, a shared experience that would linger in memory long after the rain stopped and the first light of morning appeared. Emily leaned back, her thoughts swirling, realizing that Lucas's visit was no longer just about concern or a favor for his mother. It was about something more profound, something neither could fully articulate yet both could feel, a mixture of longing, tenderness, and cautious hope that hinted at the possibility of a future neither had imagined. Lucas, watching her from across the table, felt a mirrored sense of awe and anticipation, aware that the night had changed him, awakened feelings he hadn't expected, and created an emotional space where both could explore what had been dormant for years. And as the rain continued outside, steady and constant, the night wrapped around them, quiet, intimate, and alive with potential, leaving Emily and Lucas suspended in a world that was theirs alone, where glances, smiles, and shared silences spoke louder than words ever could, a night that neither would forget, a night that had begun with a knock and transformed into an emotional revelation, a night where hearts had quietly begun to awaken, and where possibilities lingered, delicate and thrilling, ready to unfold with the coming days. The night had deepened into quiet hours where only the soft tapping of rain against the windows kept time, and Emily found herself sitting back in her chair, staring at the empty cup in front of her, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that made her chest both heavy and light, a confusing but undeniable awareness that Lucas's presence had shifted something in her she hadn't expected. She realized that the evening had not been about tea, or the rain, or even concern for his mother, but about connection, about seeing and being seen, about the fragile, thrilling possibility of intimacy that didn't need words to exist, and every glance, every subtle smile, every pause between them had built a quiet bridge between two hearts that had wandered through loneliness in their own ways for years. Across the street, Lucas leaned against his window, looking out at the rain-slicked driveways and quiet streetlights, feeling the same pull he had tried to ignore earlier, the sudden clarity that what he had thought of as a simple visit was in fact a night that would linger in both their memories, the unspoken emotions between them stronger than the words they had spoken, stronger than the small gestures, the brief touches, the shy smiles, and he realized that sometimes life delivered moments. Not with fanfare but in soft, gentle nudges, small knocks on doors that could change everything without warning. Emily rose and moved to the living room window, staring into the dark street, replaying their conversations, their silences, the way his eyes had searched hers with a mix of admiration and hesitation, and she wondered how it could be that someone she had known casually for years could suddenly feel like the only person who understood the rhythm of her thoughts, the quiet ache of her heart, the longing for connection she had thought was gone, and yet she also felt the familiar tug of fear, the knowledge that emotions this raw, this unguarded, could leave her vulnerable in ways she hadn't prepared for. Lucas, meanwhile, reflected on the night, the way Emily had listened, the softness in her voice when she wasn't trying to be strong, the little laughs that had broken through her careful composure, and he felt the quiet wonder of realizing that love, or something very close to it, could appear in the simplest of gestures, the smallest of openings, like a knock on a door in the middle of the night. And that it could be both frightening and beautiful at the same time. Both of them were aware that the connection they felt wasn't something to rush, wasn't something to force, but it was undeniably present, a fragile, electric thread tying them together in a way that neither wanted to let go of, and yet both knew that the world outside, the responsibilities, the past mistakes, the uncertainties of life, would not pause for them, so they had to carry this night within themselves, letting it simmer quietly until the right moment to explore it further. Emily moved back to her chair, hugging her knees briefly as she thought about how Lucas had grown from the boy she once waved to across the fence into a man who could stir emotions she hadn't felt in a long time, a man who could make her heart race with a simple look, a subtle smile, a hesitant question, and she realized that she didn't want to ignore these feelings, didn't want to push them away, even if she had learned the hard way that life didn't always follow the path of desire, that timing could be cruel, and that taking chances came with risk. But some risks were worth the quiet ache of anticipation. Lucas, still staring out into the night, felt a deep sense of clarity, a rare awareness that this night had given him a gift, a glimpse into a world where connection was real, emotional, and reciprocal, a world where the past and present could meet, where nostalgia for what was could combine with hope for what could be, and where he could imagine a future that included Emily in ways he hadn't dared consider before. As the clock crept closer to dawn, Emily sat quietly, listening to the rain, thinking about the subtle energy that had shifted in the room during their conversation, the unspoken acknowledgement of attraction, admiration, and something that resembled longing, the realization that the night had been a turning point in ways she couldn't yet fully understand, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, this connection could grow into something meaningful if nurtured gently and patiently. Lucas's mind replayed every glance, every shared laugh, every thoughtful pause, the way Emily had tilted her head slightly when she was curious, the softness in her voice when she was sincere, the tiny gestures that made him aware of her presence not just as a neighbor or a familiar face, but as someone rare and extraordinary, someone who could make a late-night visit feel like the most important event of the year, the kind of emotional experience that lingered long after the moment ended. Emily felt her heart light and heavy at once, aware that she had allowed herself to feel something she had resisted for so long, something gentle, tender, and entirely unexpected, and she realized that this night had opened a door she hadn't known existed, a door that could lead to emotional honesty, connection, and perhaps love if she was brave enough to follow it, and that the knock, the rain, and Lucas's presence were all part of a quiet miracle that had shifted her perspective, her longing, and her heart. The night moved slowly toward morning, but inside, time had no meaning, moments stretched, feelings deepened, and both Emily and Lucas were caught in the delicate suspension of emotion where the past, present, and possibility blended, leaving them aware of the truth that this night, born from a simple knock, had become a defining chapter in their lives, one that neither could ignore, one that promised growth, closeness, and the gentle beginnings of something neither had planned but both felt compelled to explore. And as the first faint light of dawn began to touch the edges of her curtains, Emily realized she hadn't been this aware of her own heart in years, that she hadn't felt the quiet thrill of connection like this in a long time, and that Lucas's visit had given her more than company, it had given her hope, curiosity, and a reminder that life could still surprise her in the most beautiful ways. Lucas, finally pulling himself away from the window, felt a similar mixture of hope and anticipation, knowing that although the night was ending, the feelings, the understanding, and the subtle bond they had formed would carry forward into the days ahead, leaving them both changed, aware, and ready to see where this unexpected connection might lead, and that the knock which had begun the evening had not been just an interruption, it had been an invitation, a gentle push into a night full of discovery, intimacy, and the promise of a delicate, beautiful beginning. Neither of them would ever forget.